All right, so good morning and not happy Sabbath. It is Monday. A lot of things have happened this morning. I woke up this morning after my devotions, heard about Pope Francis not being alive anymore. Just already so much things can happen within a few hours, but that's besides the point. Today we're here together for our 2025 Weimar University Research Symposium. And my name is Glennie, and I have the honor to serve as the moderator for this morning's program. So I think today is an opportunity to definitely showcase the spirit of inquiry and Christ-centered scholarship, which is, of course, the essence of what Weimar is looking for. So before we begin, let's have a word of prayer, shall we? Our Father in heaven, I thank you so much for bringing us here together this Monday morning, for giving us the energy and the desire to learn more of you. And I ask that you would be in our midst. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. So to begin our time together, Dr. Masosi will be coming up and sharing a few words on why the symposium matters for our academic and spiritual growth.
Good morning. I had actually prepared a presentation, but I decided I was not going to give it. I just want to, in the interest of time, I want things to fit within the 2 hours that we have allocated. So if I did my presentation, we will probably go over by 15 minutes or something. But Symposium is a wonderful opportunity to showcase the spirit of inquiry, the spirit of research, the spirit of seeking after knowledge. And we as Seventh-day Adventists seek after knowledge. That has to do with the here and now as well as the hereafter. We have the opportunity to showcase research that our faculty and our students have been doing. And you'll notice in the schedule that you have that we have allocated more time to the student research presentations than to the faculty one, because we want to focus on you. It's your event, so we want to focus on you. And the faculty who are presenting something are doing so to stimulate your pure minds to research. But the event is really about you, and we want to see more and more research coming from you. So with those very few brief remarks, I want to call upon our coordinator to call on the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Masosi, for those insightful remarks. So just a reminder that we have 7 presentations, 15 minutes for staff, 20 minutes for students, and we kindly ask all the speakers to be mindful of the time. So our first presenter is Mr. David Jones, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, a nationally certified counselor, and is known for his deep commitment to both academic rigor through his current doctoral studies and practical application through his active field. He is also one of our professors for the counseling and psychology programs. So Mr. Jones, the floor is yours.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. How y'all doing this morning? Blessed? Excited to be alive? Don't know how to be anything else? Well, that is a privilege. Every day that we have life is a blessing. So today I'm going to be trying to move through as quickly as possible some of the research that I am doing as I am continuing my own doctoral studies. Part of the requirement of this is to really comb into the research itself. So I won't give you the long version of this presentation, but I will try to give you a brief overview of something I'm currently studying in my studies. So this is going to be on attachment and emotion regulation. So emotions are something that people constantly feel and experience all the time. And a lot of times when they become intense, they become very difficult to deal with. Almost every mood disorder and every diagnosis that exists usually has as an underlying feature some kind of emotion dysregulation. So somebody becomes very angry, somebody becomes very anxious, people get depressed, and they don't know how to get themselves out of it. Now, throughout the ages, you have psychology considered people to have received, people had that had disorders received very brutal treatments. So what you can see up there is that's what's referred to as trephination. And with trephination, what they would do is they would drill nice little circular holes into your head to release either the bad emotions or the evil spirits or the excess amount of blood in your head. Now, you can try to guess as to whether or not this person's therapy was effective. We don't do this at the DR program, nor do I do this in my office with people. It's probably time to update how we approach emotions. But this was yesterday's therapy, was this trephination approach. So we want to be able to find something more effective than this, because obviously these things don't cure. But this actually does demonstrate how desperate people become to try to control their behaviors and change their responses. So a text that came to mind for the research here comes from Psalm chapter 4, verses 1 and 4. It says, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress." Then it says, "Stand in awe and sin not." And then what does that next part there say? It says, "Commune with your own heart upon your bed and be still." There's actually a text that talks about the idea of two things. One is that David knew that his safety and his security came from God. But the second thing was this idea that he ought to commune with himself. And this idea of communing with ourselves is something that we do all the time. On average, they estimate that a person has between 6,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. Now, that is a lot of thinking. And so if the 60,000 estimate is anywhere near close, that would mean like once every 1.2 seconds, you're thinking about something. A thought is going through your head. And if we're spending this much time talking to ourselves, we might want to be mindful of what we're talking about. And as you can probably imagine, some of that chatter can move us in the wrong direction. In fact, they found that most of the thoughts that go through our heads are repetitive. And some people have even theorized and speculated that this self-talk is a lot of what helps us to preserve who we are as people. And so, like, if I am somebody who tends to be a little bit neurotic, then my thoughts are going to constantly be like, ooh, they're looking at me kind of funny. You're talking too long. You're talking too fast. And all of my thoughts will just keep repeating like that until I feel the way I'm supposed to. But what's awesome about this is if you start to change how you commune with yourself, then you can find that stillness that David is talking about here. So just really quickly, there's a few concepts that I'll try to briefly review. So how many people are familiar with attachment theory? Have you ever heard of this before? Okay, so attachment theory is really looking at how people develop secure relationships, usually through the parent-child connection. As a child is interacting with their parent, there's a lot of face-to-face contact, there's a lot of talking back and forth, there's a lot of the parent mirroring the facial expressions of their children. And as that child is experiencing those attachment relationships, what begins to happen is they start to develop a sense of themselves and a sense of what they're supposed to expect from the world. So if when I cried, my mom picked me up, or if when I was hungry, I was fed, then I start to believe that my needs are worth meeting and that I'm worth attending to. All right, so that's the shortest way I can summarize that. So emotion regulation, as I mentioned before, is associated with almost every disorder that's in the DSM. When people do not have the ability to regulate their emotions, it also turns out that they're not able to regulate very many other things, like executive functioning is impaired by this. People's ability just to take on common tasks are impaired by a lack of emotion regulation. So one of the concepts that I'm looking at in particular to research is something called mentalizing, or what's also known as reflective functioning. The ability to mentalize is the ability to take my mental states and understand my thoughts, intentions, and behaviors, but also to understand yours. Because if I can understand where you're coming from and I can put context to why you're doing what you're doing, then I can actually begin to predict behaviors. Now, part of the reason this becomes really important and why I believe this is also a biblical concept is one of the great commandments, the second great commandment, is that we ought to love our neighbor as ourselves. Now, if you're going to love your neighbor as yourself, then you also have to be able to understand your neighbor as yourself. And this is part of the reason why you also have commands that talk about how, you don't want to try to pull the splinter out of your brother's eye until you've pulled the beam out of your own. This requires being able to understand somebody else's mental state. And what they found is that if people have, the better their attachment style is, the better they're able to understand their own mental states and the mental states of others. And the worse their attachment style is, the worse they are at this. So what this looks like is like if you ask somebody, hey, why did your parents behave the way that they do? If they have low reflective functioning or low mentalization, what they'll say is, well, how am I supposed to know? Go ask them. This is the idea that they can't even see or even begin to understand what's going on in the minds of the others. Or they can have the opposite where they say, I know exactly what they're thinking. They did this because they were jerks or because they're just narcissistic. This is also not a good example of good reflective functioning because the answers are too simplistic. And so what we want to do is we want to try to figure out how can we help people actually develop higher levels of reflective functioning. All right, so I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to skip through a lot of these because it's a lot. Now, the last little concept before I tell you what the research is we looked at distance self-talk. All right, so there's different ways you can talk to yourself. You can use what's referred to as immersed self-talk. That's where I refer to myself in the first person. Like, I really have to get my things together. I really want to make sure I do a good job on this presentation. Or I can use third-person self-talk. David, you got this. David, you can totally do this. And what they found is that when people use distance self-talk, or they refer to themselves in the third person, like if I address myself as David, what happened is that people's emotion regulation abilities went up. And so people did better at regulating their emotions when they referred to themselves in the third person. So next time you have a test, make sure that you coach yourself, but use your own name when you do it. And in fact, this was so robust, the effects of this were so robust that even when they asked people to review something negative about themselves, when they did it in the third person, they did not feel worse afterwards. Because when they used that third person approach, they remained more objective. Now, a lot of you have heard about cognitive behavioral therapy, and this is the ability to take your thoughts and challenge them. People actually do much better at this cognitive reappraisal when they use distance self-talk. So, if you don't get anything else out of today, if you start talking to yourself in the third person, you're probably going to feel a lot better. Now, part of the reason for this, too, is that they call it the Solomon effect. Now, you notice that Solomon was supposed to be the wisest man on earth, but what did his lifestyle decisions look like? They were dismal. And so he gave great advice to others, but did not take it for himself. Now, the reason for this is probably because he used this immersed self-talk. When you look at yourself as an I, then you can give yourself all kinds of excuses for why you should still be able to do something. But when you look at yourself as an other, then this actually begins to shift and change the way that you think. All right, does this make sense to everybody so far? All right, so I'm trying to move through a lot of complicated things. So there's some gaps in the research that I won't have time to go through, but all the research is demonstrating that when people do this, you can look at physiological signs that somebody is increasing emotion regulation, one of them being like pupil dilation. When people have more emotion regulation, you actually notice that the pupils will dilate less. They've looked at fMRI scans to show that people have more emotion regulation. One of my favorite ones, they use this with athletes in performance. They were looking at the VO2 max. Anybody knows what that is? So this is how much oxygen that you can take in. They found that when people talk to themselves negatively while running, that it actually increased cortisol levels, decreased their VO2 max levels, and also increased the amount of stress and the perception that they were getting tired faster. But when they spoke to themselves more positively, it increased the amount of oxygen that they can take in, it decreased cortisol levels, and increased their perception that they can keep going. All of that just from how they talk to themselves. So that's pretty incredible. So in my research, even though a lot of those things have been covered, a lot of times if you're going to do research, they want you to cover something unique that somebody else has not covered yet. And so one of the articles that I was looking at here was looking at what's called the Batman effect. And so the Batman effect is essentially when they had kids, they had them have to resist temptation. They would sit down and they had this really boring task where whenever they saw a piece of cheese, they pushed the space bar, and then if they saw a cat, they did not push the space bar. These kids were between the ages of 4 and 6. And then what they did to tempt them is they put an iPad over on the side that had this really fun game just waiting for them. They said, anytime you want to stop just watching and pushing the space bar, you can go play the game whenever you want. But they gave them 3 tasks. One of them is they can speak to themselves in the first person saying, I have to stick with this task, I have to do my best. Or they can speak to themselves in the third person, David, you have to stick with this task, just stick with it as long as you can, you're helping the researchers. Or they can refer to themselves as Batman. Batman, you need to continue doing the task. The world is counting on you. Now, guess which condition allowed for the most self-control? Batman won, yes. So the distance self-talk was in second, but the Batman effect took off higher than the rest. And so when people have an exemplar, if they have a picture of someone in their head who can do this task well, then they themselves perform better when they look to a better example. That's cool. Okay, so yeah, I don't know if y'all really want to hear about all the hypothesis stuff. You got to do these a priori power analysis. You have to, it's a 3x3 anyway. So if y'all want to know about factorial design, all that stuff, you could talk about that, but I'm sure that you'll have enough of statistics when you get to statistics, but there are ways to test your hypotheses. So once you have what sounds like a good idea, now you have to be able to test that by the scientific method to see if it's going to have an effect. So for my particular research, I wanted to see if this idea of reflective functioning, or being able to catch other people's mental states, can help people emotionally regulate. And the way I wanted to do it was not just with distance self-talk, but also having an exemplar. So if you thought of somebody who understands your thoughts and understands your intentions and your behaviors and seems to understand themselves really well. Can you think of a really good example of somebody who seems to know all those things? Yes. Yeah, I mean, like, you read Psalm 139, it says he knows my thoughts afar off. Like, he knew my thoughts before I started thinking them. So I would say his mentalization or his reflective capacity is through the roof. And so if people imagine that they are being spoken to or coached by somebody with these high reflective functioning capacities, I believe it will help them with their emotion regulation abilities. And this coincides directly with what we find in Scripture. You will recognize that this whole third-person self-talk is not something new to the Bible, because which person of the Godhead is it that speaks to us directly? The Holy Spirit. And which person is he? We usually say he is the third person of the Godhead. And when the Holy Spirit is speaking to you, do you think it sounds like I and me and all that other stuff? How do you think he speaks? Now we can see in Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 21, it says, "In thine ear shall hear a word behind thee saying, this is the way, walk ye in it," which would be at least at a minimum second person self-talk. And you can go through all the scriptures and you will find that the Spirit of God consistently reveals himself as an other when speaking to us and helping to guide our decisions. In fact, you'll notice the demons, they actually refer to themselves in the first person when they're in there. Let us alone. What do I have to do with thee, Jesus? Like, they actually speak in the first person to convince the person that they can identify with the demon that's possessed them. But the Spirit of God does not manifest himself in such ways. Okay, my time is up, at least for questions, so I'll pause here and find out if there are any questions anyone has about research. Yes?
Do you think there's any danger in referring to yourself in the third person?
No, because I've never seen anybody. So I think what you're probably thinking about is like people who are psychotic and they start like talking to themselves. You're already talking to yourself all the time. The only like danger in it is if you start talking to other people about yourself in the third person, and that would only just make you socially awkward. It's like, oh, David's having a good day. It's like, how are you doing? David's fine. So that might make me sound weird. But that's social consequences. But no, referring to yourself in third person hasn't demonstrated that it would cause any negative side effects.
Would like you to use mic when you're asking questions because we are recording. So can you help with moving the mic around if there is a question?
All right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Stunned silence. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Jones, for that really, really fascinating talk about distant self-talk. But next we'll be having one of our student researchers, Tristan Buit, who'll be presenting on the topic music and the mind. And he will actually be he's a soon-to-be graduate from the Natural Science program. And we're looking forward to all that's coming your way. So Tristan, the stage is yours.
See it already. Okay. I just need to scroll over.
Okay. Sorry about the troubles. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see all your smiling faces. I was going to say, it's always handy to carry an adapter with me, but it actually didn't work this time. So today I'm just going to be going over some of the research that I have come across as I've been preparing for my Music in the Mind concert, which happened last night. So I just want to thank all of you who came last night. It was such a wonderful, powerful experience. I was very appreciative to everyone who showed up. And today I want to delve a little bit more into kind of the research of the impact of music on your mind. This is going to be a little bit more complex than you would have heard had you come to the concert. So I hope you all are ready. Let's see, let me pull up my notes in preparation for this. Okay, here we go. So everyone knows about the frontal lobe. We hear it all the time. Everyone knows about the prefrontal cortex. We hear it all the time at Weimar. But many of you don't know more specifically what region of the brain that we're really talking about when we're talking about IQ, EQ, and overall success in life. And that's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Obviously, dorso means at the back, and then lateral means at the side. So as far as your prefrontal cortex is concerned, this is at the back of your brain towards the sides. This is your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And some of the things that your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex does is working memory. So this is something like memorizing someone's phone number long enough to write it down. This is like data manipulation, like working with a Lego set, or doing an IQ test where you fold up a piece of paper, punch a hole in it, and you have to determine what it looks like when it unfolds. Most importantly, relegated to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the idea of goal maintenance. So this is maintaining attention long enough to achieve your long-term goals. This is planning and organizing your long-term goals into shorter, more manageable steps so that you can achieve them on the micro level. And it's also suppressing immediate impulses in favor of delayed gratification. So say I wanted to become a doctor or something. My dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, I'll just call it the DLPFC for short, because I'm getting tired of saying it already. This would help me organize the microsteps responsible for me to actually achieve that doctor title. So this would be like saving money for my medical school instead of spending it on a fancy car or expensive clothes. This would be like studying hard instead of going out and partying with friends all the time. All right, so that's my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex working to make sure that happens. Say I wanted to run a marathon. My DLPFC would help me go for runs in the morning instead of sleeping in, or eat healthy food instead of binging on junk food all the time. All right? Now, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is highly dependent upon dopamine. Now, dopamine gets a bit of a bad rap in a lot of circles because we think of dopamine as the molecule of addiction. I just want to clarify that this is largely due to a misunderstanding of what dopamine is, and due to the fact that we have supernormal stimuli. These are things like alcohol. These are things like drugs. This is things like pornography that flood your brain with more dopamine than normal, so that you pursue only these supernormal stimuli instead of your everyday activities that would normally give you dopamine. And without dopamine, we wouldn't have the energy or motivation to achieve even the most basic tasks, like eating food or brushing your teeth, let alone the very difficult tasks like pursuing a career or finding a spouse or starting a side hustle. So dopamine is very, very important for your overall health, satisfaction, and success in life. And I would say that the difference between someone who is successful and a high energy person and someone who is a lazy and unmotivated person is largely due to the amount of dopamine circulating in their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So we can think of dopamine as kind of like a fuel. So the dopamine is like the fuel that allows your engine, your DLPFC, to run its best. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the nature of dopamine. So dopamine is based more on anticipation of reward than the actual reward itself. So, for example, the drug addict is going to get more dopamine prepping the needle than actually inserting the needle and feeling the effects of the drug itself. The smoker is going to get a higher hit of dopamine thinking about going to the gas station and getting a pack of Marlboro than actually smoking the cig itself. So the dopamine system is one that's based on anticipation of reward, while it's the opioid system that is responsible for the feeling of pleasure when you actually do have that reward. However, the dopamine system is much stronger than the opioid system, and therefore the anticipation of reward is actually often more pleasurable than the reward itself. Okay, well, little did you know, music can actually stimulate the release of dopamine in your brain, and this is very fascinating. Part of the reason that music is so enjoyable is because your brain actually makes predictions and it anticipates based on prior musical elements that you find in the music. Music is a highly deep, complex process of cognitive thinking, and it's based on making predictions and anticipations on patterns. So your brain's going to anticipate the next note, chord, rhythm, phrase based on what it heard previously. So this is very fascinating. It's more so based on complex cognitive thinking than just simply liking the notes or liking the sound of the music. It's very complex cognitive thinking. Now, we have to consider the nature of dopamine when we're talking about what types of music are going to best stimulate dopamine in your prefrontal cortex or your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the engine that's responsible for most of your success and satisfaction in life. Now, we understand that dopamine is released when we're anticipating, right? So we need to think of things that can help us anticipate musical elements. Now, let's just say we went to Carnegie Hall and we listened to Mary Had a Little Lamb for 7 to 8 minutes straight. Now, would that be very exciting? No. Would that be very dopamine inducing in your brain? No. Why? Because it's too simple. Your predictions are always going to be right, so there's no reason for anticipation. And thus, dopamine, which is the molecule of anticipation, is not going to be released in your brain and in your prefrontal cortex. How about if we went to Carnegie Hall and we heard postmodern music? Would that be very exciting? Probably not. Postmodern music is very complex, might I say. It has a lot of complex elements, and unfortunately, it is so complex that there are no musical patterns or home base to base any sort of predictions off of, and thus your brain has no ability to anticipate in the first place, and thus if you can't anticipate what's going to happen to your dopamine, it's not going to be released. Right? So you're not going to get that healthy, natural, exciting surge of dopamine that's going to make you go out and want to accomplish things in life. Now, what is the optimal amount of complexity that you need in your music? That's going to be something of moderate complexity. And that's taking something like a simple phrase and expanding it in creative and different ways. So, so let's go to Carnegie Hall again, and this time we're going to listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Okay, are we going to be intellectually stimulated by that? Hopefully, yes. And why? It has a simple motif. Does anyone know the motif for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Dun, 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 dun. Yes. Okay, super simple motif. It's even simpler than Mary Had a Little Lamb, even simpler than Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But why is it so exciting? It's taking four notes, and using it in so many different ways, a variety of different, fun, creative ways, right? And if you actually count the amount of times that phrase is used, it's used over 200 times in that symphony, and it's used in about 8 to 10 unique and different variations. That's what makes this music so stimulating and exciting. Okay, so we learned that there's kind of like this Goldilocks zone as far as complexity is concerned for music. And there's one master of the Goldilocks zone, and that is none other than Mozart. And since I have a little bit of time, I heard I had 20 minutes instead of 10, which I was told as of yesterday. So I'll take a little bit of extra time to delve into the history because I have the opportunity to do so. Let me just pull up the notes that I had for that. Okay, so there was a very famous study on Mozart's music specifically done in 1993 that really changed the Western world. And this was done in 1993 by a group of 3 researchers, and they took college students and they split them up into 3 groups. So one group, they had listened to nothing for 10 minutes. They listened to silence. The next group, they had listened to relaxation techniques like breathe in deeply, breathe out, over and over, kind of boring. That was 10 minutes as well. And then the final piece, the third group of college students listened to a piece by Mozart. I believe, don't quote me on this, this was Mozart Piano Concerto for 2 pianos in D major. I may be wrong. But after these 10 minutes, they had these college students take basically the equivalent of an IQ test. This measures your temporospatial reasoning, which is highly relegated to your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which again is responsible for your IQ and EQ and success and satisfaction in life. And they found that people that listened to Mozart did better. They had a 10 to 15 minute boost in their temporospatial reasoning skills. Again, this is something like you would find on an IQ test where you fold up a piece of paper, punch a hole in it, and see what it looks like when it unfolds. So people that listened to Mozart did better. And this went wild. It totally launched this like smart baby culture where these like helicopter moms thought they could sit their baby down in front of Mozart and all of a sudden they'd be like Einstein. And actually, this was so successful in the Western world, it actually led to the franchise Baby Einstein. How many of you are familiar with Baby Einstein? And the corollary of Baby Einstein, which was Baby Mozart. This is something I actually watched when I was a little kid. It came out in 1998. I watched it when I was a toddler. Disney bought this in 2001, and then in 2005, this naturally evolved into Little Einstein. How many of you know who Little Einstein is or watched the show? Yeah, I watched the show as well as a toddler. Maybe it contributed, I don't know. But I watched Little Einstein, and actually if you one of the first episodes launched by Little Einstein under Disney's new regime was a episode called Whale Tale, and in Whale Tale they used Mozart Horn Concerto No. 2, which is not something we played last night. We played 1, 3, and 4, but you can look at it. Whale Tale, it's going to use the last movement of Mozart Horn Concerto No. 2. Okay, how am I doing on time? I think I'm pretty good. All right, so I'll go back to the regularly scheduled program. Let's see, what am I talking about? Okay, so there's a Goldilocks zone, right? And then there's extremes. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of on the one extreme, which is very, very simple, repetitive music. So, and to illustrate, I'm going to talk about a study done by famous researcher Andrew Newberg. How many of you are familiar with Andrew Newberg? No, okay, I didn't think so. He's kind of a neuroscientist that's into what happens in your brain during like acts of worship or prayer or meditation. Is very much like neurotheology type stuff. And one of the things he looked at was the brains of people who were undergoing Eastern meditation. So these were like really dedicated monks and nuns. And what they found is that in these monks and nuns, when they were focused on this repetitive phrase like Om, for example, activity in the parietal lobe would actually decrease. Now, who knows what the parietal lobe is responsible for? Spatial awareness, right? Orientation in 3D space. So what happens if you have decreased ability to understand where you are in 3D space? You're having these out-of-body experiences where you're losing touch with reality. And many would quote this as a so-called spiritual experience, but what is really actually happening is that the activity in your brain is going down. So the same thing can happen with music. You have highly repetitive music, and we see this a lot of the time in praise worship. Praise worship, where it's like focusing on one praise over and over, or one phrase over and over, people falling on the ground, losing touch with reality. What's really happening is this is a highly, maybe emotionally charged experience, but what's really happening is that the activity in your brain is going down. Okay, so now on the other extreme, we talked about overly simple music. Now I want to talk about overly complex music. And overly complex music will subject you to what we call cognitive overload. And this is what happens when your brain has too many items for it to handle. Again, your prefrontal cortex, particularly your DLPFC, only has a certain amount that it can hold. For example, working memory can be overloaded. So if you have a lot of complex elements, so if you have a lot of complex elements like syncopation, you have a lot of complex elements like dissonance, even excessive loudness can cause cognitive overload in your brain. And what this does is that your prefrontal cortex literally gives up. It stops trying. And when you have too many of these elements, what happens is you're subject to poor decision making and cognitive fatigue. So a little bit, as we said, there's a certain level of healthy tension that comes with a little bit of dissonance or syncopation. However, if you use it in excess, again, also syncopation, dissonance, excessive loudness, things like punk rock, heavy metal, avant-garde jazz, these are things that are that leave you subject to cognitive overload, which again is going to decrease the activity of your success machine, which is your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this is amazing to me. Ellen White literally talks about this when she's talking about the Holy Flesh movement starting at the turn of the 20th century in Indiana. She says, okay, here we go. I have to read it from the screen because I don't have it. The things you have described as taking place in Indiana, the Lord has shown me would take place just before the close of probation. Every uncouth thing will be demonstrated. There will be shouting with drums, music, and dancing. The senses of rational beings will become so confused that they cannot be trusted to make right decisions. This is Ellen White saying that the Lord showed it to her directly. And interestingly, she notes that it is music that compromises the prefrontal cortex, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and prevents people from actually making right decisions. So the music that you listen to definitely has an impact on your cognitive function and your success in life. It's going to, the music that you listen to can either have those natural exciting surges of dopamine in your brain that drive you to success, drive you to be ambitious, drive you to life satisfaction, or things that can really drag you down. So again, I just want to submit to you that the choice of music that you listen to is very important, and I hope this was a blessing for you all. So I just want to thank you again for listening, and thank you to those who were there last night. It was really a special experience. So thank you very much. Oh, do you guys have questions? I'm open to questions. If not, that's fine too. Felicity.
What's your favorite song to listen to?
Ooh. Well, okay, I think that's a good question. I played a lot of great songs last night. I think the first song I played last night, Nocturno by Franz Strauss, is just a very wonderful piece, very melancholy and beautiful. Yeah, one of my favorites. Yeah, Inoa.
Is there any benefit to listening to music while you work out? And if so, what kind of music?
Yeah, okay, so again, what's going to drive you to do difficult things? Something that can stimulate dopamine in your brain. Again, so you want something that, you can go with something that, there is some research that shows that like like really strong rhythms can release dopamine a lot in your brain. So something like that. Again, I was initially averse to classical music when working out, but as I was studying this out, I was like, maybe it's not too bad. So yeah, honestly, it's up to you, but I would say music actually does help. I would say, again, when I work out, I don't listen to music typically. I usually go with a friend, and that keeps me motivated enough to do my workout. But again, if you're by yourself, music is definitely a good thing that you can do while working out. Yes. Moses or Michael? Michael.
So there are some songs that are repetitive, but you might have like a perfectly okay song, but someone really likes it and they listen to it just on repeat for a really long time. Is that also going to decrease your cognitive functioning?
I wouldn't think so. But you're saying someone that has like a song they really like and they put it on repeat. Actually, if you have a song that you really like, this actually can also release dopamine because you have an emotional attachment to the music. So again, a piece that you really like is actually going to be very good for stimulating dopamine. Okay, I think that's it, right? No more questions? All right, I'll give it to Glennie. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tristan, for that engaging way and look into how different types of music can alter your brain. We're honored to have Dr. Christina Harris, who will be sharing her latest work as well. Or not her latest.
Yeah, this isn't my latest. I've been studying you guys' latest, and I think I've shared with you everything that that I've done so far. Is it going to come? There it goes. Okay, so I'm going to share with you my chemistry journey. Throughout my life, I've worked more on cancer drugs and antibiotics when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I started out at Oklahoma State working on a project that dealt with these types of reactions that are shown here, and only a handful of you will possibly understand the structures on the screen. But I ended up doing research because one of the professors came to me and said, you need to do research. And he wanted me to do research with computers. And I went to the lab once and I was like, I don't know what to do. So I said, I want to do real chemistry. So I found a lab to work in. And so I worked on this chemistry here. And what happens is the methyl group, you use a cuprate, like a copper Grignard, and then that makes an anion, and it cyclizes. And then, so that's how that worked. Now, the next thing I did was I went to graduate school at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And while I was there, I got a lot of papers. That was before I was converted, and I worked all the time. I knew about the Sabbath, but to keep the Sabbath, I would go home when it got dark on Friday night, and I would sleep until the afternoon of the next day because I worked so much during the week. And then I would get up at sundown and go back to work. So I wasn't really keeping Sabbath. But there I worked on samarium iodide chemistry, which is like a Grignard, for those of you that recognize that. And that was back in the 1900s. And so this is one of the projects I work with. Samarium iodide is like a Grignard, but it's more selective. And so it reacts with the iodide first, and that attacks the ester or the lactone. And then that opens up and then makes a ketone, and then it attacks, the chloride attacks the ketone. And you can make bicyclic ring systems. Now, the reason this is helpful, I did another project like that too, but this time using a double bond and an iodide. work very similarly. The reason you do this is because in nature you find natural products, and they often have rings. And you can see at the top there's 3 rings kind of attached to each other. They'll find antibiotic in nature, and it might have those ring systems. And so organic chemists want to make that. And they make it, and then they tweak it, and then they see, well, does this fight the cancer or the bacteria better than the original? You need to find something that's a little bit different than the original that you isolate from nature, because if not, you can't patent it. You could patent the synthesis of it, but you can't patent the drug. Anybody can make the drug because it's a natural product. So I was working on making some ring systems like that, and then finally I was able to make some that were 3 cyclic 3-membered rings, 3 3-membered rings in it. And that was pretty neat, and just a lot of different types of chemistry, all of it reacting like a Grignard. In this case, you make the Grignard at the iodide, and then it attacks the double bond in a 1,4 addition reaction. And then the last project I worked on is shown here, and we're not making rings, but we're adding a lot of functional groups to the ring. The more groups off the ring, the better, because then you can make something that actually looks like a natural product. And then here, you can see we're getting even more complexity. And so that was what I was working on, those projects. So eventually, right at the end of my graduate career, somebody gave me the book. It was called The Last Trolley Out. I might have told some of you this, and I realized that it was about end times. And I put it away because I didn't want to read it, because I was afraid of the end times. When I was little, I knew somewhat about Seventh-day Adventist. I knew the Sabbath because my grandma was a Seventh-day Adventist. I knew about the time of trouble, and I knew that I shouldn't eat pork. That's what I knew. So I was always scared of the time of trouble, and I told my mom, I said I don't want Jesus to come back, because I was scared if he came back that I would go to hell. And she told me not to think about it. And so I think I was not thinking about it while I was doing all that chemistry in the lab. And so that was a turning point. I ended up reading that book, and I read it on a Sabbath, and I thought I'll read it till it gets scary, and it never got scary. So I finished the book, and then that was like the beginning of a rebirth or a birth, I guess, of my spiritual walk. And then I went to New York City, and I did a postdoc at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And there I worked on 2 cancer drugs. One was Taxol, and the other was Ipothalone. I worked more on the Ipothalone. And this is the structure of paclitaxel. This is used to fight cancer right now. It was isolated from the bark of the Pacific yew tree initially, and then you couldn't make enough Pacific yew trees to get enough cancer drug to fight cancer. So it would take like 9 trees to get enough to treat one person. So instead, they discovered that they could find a precursor to that compound in the needles of the tree. So they would get it was semi-synthetic, where they would get the main part, the 3-ring part, they would get that from the needles of the tree, and then they would add the left side of the molecule to it. And that's how they make Taxol or Taxotere now. I was working on the drug to the right, Ipothalone, and they both have the same mechanism of action. They bind to microtubules when they're doing mitosis, and if they bind to them and they stabilize the microtubules, it stays in that state. And then that prevents it from completing mitosis, and then that leads to apoptosis, and the cell dies. So hopefully you can kill the cancer cells before you hurt regular healthy cells. And that was the goal of it. So I worked on that. The part that I worked on, since it was such a big molecule, was that bottom part right next to where it says Suzuki coupling. That was my part of the molecule. And the hard part about that is it was chiral, meaning it had handedness. You know, your hands are chiral. They're mirror images of each other, but they're not identical to each other. So I had to work on making that part of the molecule. And that was quite a bit of work. Again, I was working a lot, but I was doing better at keeping Sabbath. And so the reason we worked on epathalone was because it would work against cancer that was refractory to Taxol. And you can see there it says compound number, and then it says at the top it has an R group. That's just the functional group, that is where that R is on the structure. And then it lists the IC50 for the drug against the standard cell line. And then it lists the IC50 divided by the ratio with when it's could be resistant. And you can see that for compound 4, it's resistant, the ratio is 17. You want the lower ratio would be it was better at fighting cancer that had come back after somebody had been cured, compared to paclitaxel, which was 4,000. So those cancer cells were sensitive to epathalone where they weren't sensitive to Taxol anymore. And so that's why we were working on that drug. And then I wrote some reviews for my boss. And eventually we got a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, and that was kind of a big deal, looking at that drug. And then just basically that's the same slide as before, but that's the one that we put in the paper. And then right before I left for New York, somebody gave me the Bible study guide on the book of Mark. And I took that with me to New York, and that was the first time I started studying the Bible on my own. And that was really transformative. After that, I started going to church, and I found a church in New York to go to that was Adventist. And the first sermon I heard was on Ecclesiastes. And he was talking about, he says, vanity, vanity, all is vanity. And I had gotten all these papers published, and I kept thinking, well, one more paper, and then I'll be successful. One more paper, and I'll be successful. But the success never came with another paper. So I started studying that, and then I did the Revelation seminars. I Googled or Yahooed Daniel and Revelation one night, and that's what popped up. And there was a physician in North Carolina that was giving Bible studies. It was the first online Bible studies where he would mail me the Bible study and I would email him the answers back. And that was an important part of my journey. And then I went to Net 98 and I realized how old that picture looks. And after that, I was baptized in 1999. And then I went to work at Pharmacia. And I worked there on a drug called linezolid, which is marketed today as Zyvox. And if you have a bacterial infection and it's resistant against most drugs, or you come into the hospital and you're septic or something, with my dad, they would give him vancomycin and they would give him Zyvox. And I remember telling my dad, I worked on that compound when it was becoming a drug, and he said, do they know? And wanted to make sure that they knew that I had worked on that. So that was a neat experience, but I was only there for 3 years, and then we all got laid off by Pfizer, and then I went to Arise. And I had decided I was done with chemistry. I was never going to do anything chemistry related again. I was just going to study the Bible, and I went to Arise. And then after that, well, I guess those slides are out of order. But at Pharmacia, I worked on linezolid, and the thing linezolid does is it binds to the ribosome when it's making the protein, and it keeps the bacteria from building its protein because it binds to the A site in the ribosome and just halts it there and keeps the peptide bond from forming. So I was at Arise, and then after Arise, I was doing Bible work one day, and the lady told me that her husband was the dean at the College of Arts and Sciences, and she said, my husband says that there's an opening for an organic chemist at the college, at the university, and we think you should apply. And Bible work wasn't really the thing for me. I don't think. It was kind of a lonely job, and I applied for that job. There were like 100 applicants, and somehow I got the job. And so I worked there for a year and really enjoyed it. But at the end of it, they couldn't hire me because there was a hiring freeze. So I went back and worked some more in the pharmaceutical industry, and I worked for a company called Colexin. And there I worked on drugs that are related to ciprofloxacin, and made the drug on the left is one of the drugs that we made that was better than ciprofloxacin. But you can't just make a drug that has better activity in the petri dish. It also has to have better activity in the person. The company that we were working for with that I noticed just went bankrupt a few years ago, so I don't think that drug went anywhere. And then after Colexin, I came to Weimar. And since then, I've been studying you, and I've shared you with you a couple of times. And that's my presentation. Are there any questions? Any questions? I knew that not everybody would understand the chemistry, so I thought I would mix in some of my testimony with it to somewhat keep your attention. All right, well, I don't see any questions. Thank you.
I saw this quote this weekend which said, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. So thank you, Dr. Harris, for your contributions towards the scientific literature and surrendering your knowledge to an eternal cause now. So our next student presenter is Lillian Stafford. Is she here? Oh yeah, she's right there. Okay. She'll be sharing her research on John Tyndall and about the medical missionary work. So we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Is it going to show up how I want it to? This is not all I see. Is that supposed to be streaming? extend display? That's probably what I need. I need to, there's another, oh, this one needs to go. Ah, but now I can't see it. I cannot see anything. Oh, okay. Alright. Okay, there we go. All right, I'm very excited to share with you all this morning some of the research I've been doing, and I would like to begin with a prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, this research I've done is for you, and I just ask that you be glorified through this presentation. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. So I remember my freshman year at Weimar University. I was only 1 month into school, and Tyndall Suites had just gotten finished. And Mark Finley came to our campus. He came for board weekend, and that was the dedication of the Tyndall Suites. I remember hearing him talking about this man named John Tyndall and what this guy did, and just being so amazed at this gospel medical missionary evangelism that he did. It stuck in my mind, and then a few months later, I read the book De Sozo. And De Sozo went into greater detail, and after I read that book, I was like, man, I want to do this. I really, really want to do this kind of work. And then in April of that year, in SDA Church History class, I remember Dr. Z, I went to him and I said, Dr. Z, I don't know what to write my research paper on. And he was like, why don't you write on John Tyndall? I was like, yes. That was what it was going to be. So this has been a very long project and very long standing. I've been just blown away by the simplicity, the excellence, and the power of how combined talents and medical missionary work, how that God uses that to put down prejudice and reach hearts. John Tyndall was a very successful evangelist. He baptized over 1,000 people within 12 years using this kind of method. And I was very astounded by his methods, whereas in the past, it was not so successful for other people. So this past year, when Pastor Tsar asked me to help him write a biography on John Tyndall, I'm very excited to accept that project. So just going into a little bit of the research methods in putting this together, I found over 400 periodicals and data from Adventist archives. I've gone through about 250 of those. There's still some more that I still need to go through. Some of them are very simple. Some of them have long stories. I also have many books. Tyndall's books that he wrote, his personal letters, various reports. Somebody did a thesis on him. There's also an out-of-print gospel medical syllabus from the Madison College. And also, I had an opportunity a few weeks ago to visit Mark Finley's place in Virginia and to go through some of his materials and Tyndall's personal library and Bible over there. And also, we have done interviews with Pastor Mark Finley and Dr. Phil Mills. Well, as far as the methods go, it's a very long-winded project. Has to do with selecting, printing, then reading, then highlighting, compiling, referencing, writing, referencing, writing, referencing, writing, referencing, writing, until a satisfactory picture is portrayed. And my purpose is to use all materials possible to provide a comprehensive picture of John Tyndall's life and the work, chapter by chapter, to complete his biography. Now, I have several limitations. The first one is that John Tyndall is no longer alive, and so it's a bit challenging to be able to write on somebody who's no longer here. So you really have to rely on people that know him and on the sources that you have. Also, something I do also keep in mind is that I know that when you write reports and periodicals, sometimes people have a positive bias and they try to exaggerate or show things a little bit nicer than they actually are. So I try to keep that in mind as well as I'm going through these things. But nevertheless, the reports are fascinating. Tyndall actually did not start out as a Christian. He was first, actually a Christian, but then he became an atheist. And when he was a very little boy, his brother actually passed away. And when his brother died, he got very confused because he was kind of a logical, no-nonsense kind of guy. He said, well, I see my brother, he's in the coffin, and he cannot open his eyes, but people say he's in heaven, and he can play, and he's watching me, but that doesn't make any sense. So he was very confused, and a few weeks later, or a little while later, there was a Methodist preacher that came and started talking about the whole hell doctrine and everything, and that really pushed him away because he realized that he could not love a God that was like that. Well, in short, God really had to bring him through a lot to come back because this guy was so passionate about his atheistic views when he actually got there through his education and such that he desired to bring the world hope through atheism because he thought that was the way to make people free. Well, I don't have time to go into his whole story today, but basically he met a man that was able to bring him back to God through a very logical study of the Bible as well as the spirit of prophecy. And when he was converted, when he realized the actual truth about God, he completely switched. Instead of desiring to bring the world hope through atheism, he desired to bring the world hope through real biblical understanding. So pretty soon he went to Loma Linda University. It wasn't Loma Linda University at the time. It was the College of Medical Evangelists. And they had their medical evangelist program that had just started pretty recently. And he went to go take that course. And at the end of his course, Ellen White had already been telling the church about medical missionary work for 40 years. But in the last 20, she had been impressing them again and again. You have to do this company evangelism. You have to do medical missionary work. Combine the doctors with the pastors. Combine the medical with the gospel. And finally, it was in 1910, the year he graduated, she had this vision. And this is actually John Tyndall's copy of the vision you can see right here that he underlined. And it says, during the night of February 27, a representation was given me in which the unworked cities were represented before me as a living reality. And I was plainly instructed there should be a decided change from past methods of working. For months, the situation has been impressed on my mind, and I urged that companies be organized and diligently trained to labor in our important cities. These workers should labor 2 by 2, and from time to time, all should meet together and relate their experiences, pray, and plan how to reach the people quickly, and thus, if possible, redeem the time. Now, what were the past methods of working? Around that time, the kind of evangelism they did was this. There would be about 1 or 2 ministers that would go with a tent and a Bible worker, and they would go hold meetings. That's all they did. But Ellen White saw something that was so much better and that was so much more successful, and these old methods would always turn people away from God, and they would do all that, but God wanted something different. This was to be a combined work. These companies, there should be companies organized and educated most thoroughly to work as nurses, evangelists, ministers, canvassers, as gospel students, to perfect a character after the divine similitude. It was to be a combined work. Now, I feel like I'm kind of skipping through his life because it's very, very fast. But this was his campaign company, and this was in the model that Ellen White had given. There was this combination of medical work and evangelistic work. So John Tyndall and his assistant, this was kind of later on, once they kind of developed their company model, there would be the evangelist and his assistant, a medical evangelist, helper nurses, helper Bible workers, singing evangelists, and canvassers. This was all combined together. And this is the plan of the work. This is where everything's centralized. You had the public lectures, the church involvement, and visitations all combined together, as well as a Monday workers' meeting. Now, I will go briefly into each of these sections in a moment, but I want to emphasize the Monday workers' meeting. every Monday morning, they would take the entire morning and they would set it aside to have basically roundtable discussion. They would, anyone, anywhere could bring any question that they had to, this was within the team, any question they had about some things. They would talk about their contacts that they were working with. They would pray for them. They would have a time of study, a time of prayer, and this was just the uniting factor that would keep them throughout the whole week. Then public lectures ran about 3 times a week. They would do evangelistic meetings every Sunday night and health lectures every Tuesday and Thursday, but eventually those would drop out and replace with evangelistic lectures as time went on. The church got very involved, and we'll see that in a moment. And there were also, whenever they were not in lectures and not in the Monday workers meetings, they were in visitations. That was very big. This is a bit more detailed in how it was. There were business interviews that John Tyndall did at the beginning of his campaigns, and he would basically go to these big businesses and these big businessmen, police departments and everything, and he would go and he would tell them exactly what he was doing and saying, okay, can you help support me? And they would actually freely give him donations. People donated like hydrotherapy supplies, they donated groceries, they donated money, they donated like pretty much everything he could possibly need. And sometimes those donations would like completely cover everything that was there. Then they would do quite a bit of announcing and advertising, but then all these things branched together. The church started to get involved. At the beginning of their campaigns, they would use this Sabbath service as a time to give special systematic education to the church, basically telling them about, basically reviving the church, telling them about working for people and such things like that and everything that they needed to do, because a lot of these churches that he came to were dead churches. Then there would be visitations that they would do, and there were they would do Bible studies, they would do treatments, and they would do medical consultations, all free of charge. Now, then everything came together. They would have classes for the church that they would term a person, and this class of people would be the personal workers band. Then they were taught how to have a real Christian experience and heart work, and how to work for their neighbors. There were Bible classes also for anyone who was interested to give besides the public lectures in a smaller setting, so that people could be thoroughly educated on Bible truths. There were cooking classes, lots of demonstrations. It was a very open, demonstrative kind of work. And it made disciples. Now, this is very different from the model that I described in the past methods, but this is how the public responded. This is a report from the Review and Herald. It says, this combination of gospel and medical work appeals to the people as consistent missionary effort. Expressions of hearty appreciation are heard from many, especially businessmen and the better class of people. All classes are reached and prejudices are allayed. Now, it's very interesting because often Tyndall would come into a place that had been super prejudiced against Adventists. Sometimes the Adventist church there was one church where this one member, he was drinking, and he had a very bad reputation. But as soon as they realized that people were this was consistent missionary effort. It wasn't just like, okay, let's teach us your spiritual truths so that you can be evangelized, so that we can change your minds or something. It was combining that all together with the medical work, and this is why it worked. Testimonies, Volume 6, says that the gospel ministry is needed to give permanence and stability to the medical missionary work. And the ministry needs the medical missionary work to demonstrate the practical working of the gospel. Neither part of the work is complete without the other. This is why it worked. This is why he had so much success. And this is the work that God wanted us to do. Now, when you look back here, I don't know. In the public lectures, you can kind of imagine evangelizing. In the church involvement, you can imagine teaching, visitations, you can imagine healing. Teaching, preaching, and healing ministry of Christ right there, all wound through. Now, After about 12 years of doing this, Tyndall went back to school, and then he came back out and went to work in San Francisco, and he actually started a training school program that lasted about 4 years. And this did a very systematic job of combining the gospel and medical work. The students that would come would be foreign missionaries on furlough, ministers, Bible workers, doctors, nurses, dietitians, college graduates, and anyone else. And these students would pair with trained Bible workers, health teachers, and other field workers, and they would go 2 by 2 to reach people in the community. Everything was intensive and practical. The science was scientifically sound and at the same time simple and clear. And they also had a Monday workers meeting where anyone could ask any question at any time, and it brought a lot of unity and everyone was on the same page. Kind of like a social meeting. And you can see here their classwork, very evenly divided between gospel and medical training. It's quite an interesting, we don't really see a training school program like this, but it was very effective, as we will see in a moment. So I just wanted to share a few pictures here that I got from visiting Mark Finley. These are the training instructors in San Francisco. You can see John Tyndall, he's in the middle. Let's see, third from the left on the front row. He's there. This is also another picture of the Teacher's Home Dietetic School classroom. Here, they are actually judging bread. They had quite a bit of rigor in their classroom, and so, like, can you make a good loaf of bread? And they would judge. And they would also divide all of their students into various groups, kind of like TCI, where they would go out and do work together. This is one of the groups in Oakland. This is another group in San Francisco. Ellen White says that a well-balanced work can be best carried on best when a training school for Bible workers is in progress. While the public meetings are being held, connected with this training school or city mission should be experienced laborers of deep spiritual understanding who can give the Bible workers daily instruction and who can also unite wholeheartedly in the general public effort being put forth. This was a very successful training program. This is a list of some of their graduates. Now, it's very interesting to me that when they list their graduates, it's not, okay, these are the people that took our course. What is the key to know whether they are, graduates, you can say? Field training school students engaged in the work. That's pretty crazy. Now, this is actually some of the results that came out of John Tyndall's work. John Tyndall was the mentor of W.D. Frazee. They had quite a close relationship, which I'm not able to describe today for lack of time. But also, W.D. Frazee trained in Mark Finley. And so there's this progression and lineage here of people who are truly following what the Lord has to say. Now, it's very interesting when the very last time that Mark Finley was with John Tyndall came to Mark Finley. Mark Finley was doing an evangelistic meeting. His wife was doing a health lecture, and they were doing all this combined work. And John Tyndall came up, put his arms around Mark Finley, and he said, "This is what the prophet has said. You're young. Go and do it." Now, this is a question. Who's going to take up this work? All of these people from history are fading into the distance. But who is that generation that will come up and finish the work? Who is that generation that will come forward, that will do what the prophet had said, that will follow these messages that God has been telling us for years and years, and we're not listening? Who will go? Thank you. Any questions?
You mentioned his school only lasted for 4 years in San Francisco. Do you know why?
Yeah, unfortunately, the devil likes to get into the details and shut things down that shouldn't be shut down. Basically, what happened when that shut down was that the conferences kind of, there was some misunderstanding between the school and the conference. They didn't really like his work. They thought that he was stealing from their schools, which is not true because he didn't accept people that were like high school students. Very interesting. And also, they divided the leadership of the school. They sent them to different conferences, and so it was divided, unfortunately. Any other questions?
So how were his campaigns funded? I know you had mentioned he went to like business people. Was that primarily how they were funded, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so he actually, he worked directly with the conference, so he was conference funded. So that was how it mainly worked. In the beginning, it was a little sketchy because they weren't sure if it would work, but then it did work. But he was funded by the conference, but then for all of his health work, he would try to get the people in the public to support it. And also, when these converts would come into the church, they would actually support. And he got huge donations from people who received the truth because of his work. And often they would like more than cover the entire campaign cost.
I was just wondering what was his vision for integrating this to the local church?
Yeah, well, you can kind of see it retrospectively, that when he went into a place, he immediately got involved with the local church, started sharing with them on Sabbath. He would institute classes for them. They would have like special cooking classes. They would have special Bible classes, special classes on how to have personal work with how to do that for their neighbors. And you would see churches from the beginning, they would be like very dead. They wouldn't hardly be doing anything. And at the end, they were like, for example, they're the first ones to sell out their quota of Ministry of Healing books, or they have the greatest tithe increase in like the last year, or like things like this. You could see statistically that it would just like explode.
Were they preaching for like 9 months straight, or did they have like a set time where it was mostly like, okay, here's where we're going to preach, and then the rest of the program is going to be mostly visitations? How was the campaign divided?
The campaign was divided over several months, and the evangelistic meetings were the most consistent thing that actually happened every single week, and then they would also add meetings as closer to the end as they phased out of the medical side.
Right. Thank you so much, Lillian. I don't know about you, but with her appeal, I just had goosebumps. It's a good reminder. So we'll now welcome Dr. Maria Rodriguez, who brings her years of expertise in both the business and higher education field. She actually recently completed her doctoral program in higher education administration. So we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning. I want to start talking quickly because the time, so I need help. I don't know what to do in terms of putting the screen here, my presentation. So I just want to share with you, when I met my husband at the University of Puerto Rico, he was working on his dissertation, and I actually went and helped him with the statistical work. And I remember that he was 100% consumed by the studies that he was doing. And no, he will not talk about anything else but his studies and his research. And I realized when I started my dissertation that I wanted to do something that if I'm gonna be consumed by something, it has to be worthwhile in terms of spiritual growth. Because the time that when you're doing research, especially dissertation, you dream, you think, you're just eating and thinking about your studies. So I wanted to do something meaningful. in my that will help my spiritual walk with God as well. So okay. So my study is how the students, moral development of the students, what can higher education do about this? My research started, or the motivation of my research started when I was working in corporate America. And I had so many friends that I had very high esteem of their work and their ethics. And then they had a fall. And it was very common to see people that you respect to just go out of the organization for doing things that were like wrong. And when I was finishing my higher education studies, I started thinking about what can higher education do about this. And I realized that actually in 1998, the US Congress amendments to the Higher Education Act of 1965, the US Congress affirmed that student character development is one of the primary goals of higher education. You know, even though the secular education, you're thinking more about intellectual growth, they also see that there is a responsibility of developing the character of the students. Now, we as Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have a truth, and we know that the reason of our education is mostly the character and spiritual development of our students. And is this, okay. And there is this quote that inspired me that says, "The education and training of the youth is an important and solemn work. The great object to be secured should be the proper development of the character, that the individuals may be fitted rightly to discharge the duties of the present life and to enter in the at last upon the future immortal life." I realized that in my studies, I wanted to focus on that it really matters. Now, let me go straight because the time is very limited. I had two choices. When you're doing a research, you need to choose which glasses are you going to use to see your problem. And one of the areas that I had was, one option that I had was looking from more our church perspective or Christian perspective that has to do with what we know how character is developed. But what I did was, actually, I did something different. I knew what truth was because the councils told me so. And then I used that. I knew that the counsel that we had is that the faculty should be working closely with the students. And also that they should be involved in helping others. And that will have an impact on the moral development of the students, the spiritual development of the students. So I used that as my foundation, but then I chose actually the worldly framework to look at the problem. And then I decided to study what is the impact that faculty mentoring, working in the community, engaged in helping others, have on the moral development of the students. And the findings were very interesting. This is actually the worldly framework. It's just based on Plato and Aristotle, that the learnings are coming more from experience and intellectual development. I didn't realize I had so many of these things. So this is the foundation. There are two theories that really were the ones that I used, and it's basically that you develop morality by observing others and by experiencing helping others. The funny thing is they do have the theory right, but they have not really gone deep into the studies. So the methodology that I used, I interviewed 502 students. Some of you actually participated in that study. Those were mostly Christian-based schools, and that's one of the challenges that I had. I had the opportunity to get into University of Texas, but then COVID hit, and I could not get secular universities data, and that's what I'm planning to do in the near future. So I conducted my statistical analysis, and I'm not going to go into the details to not to bore, because the time is very limited. But what we found is this. We found that combining actually a faculty role model working with the student in community engagement, it predicted 20% actually of the moral identity of the students. And that was very significant and statistically significant, and it was also for me very significant because it's actually proving that the counsel that we have really is true. Well, I knew it was true, but data is confirming that. And that is helping us, actually helping me at this point to go into secular world and share the data, because what happens is if I am doing a research, I only focus on the Christian perspective and the framework, they immediately have shut down and you cannot get through. Right now I have actually worldly faculty members that want to engage in studies and continue this study with me just because of the results and because the framework that I use. What are the major findings? I already shared that. My recommendations, the recommendations in my studies were focusing on, actually, we have the students, from the student perspective, it's not all faculty. Actually, the students need to have the desire to understand that by engaging with the faculty, look for opportunities. Sometimes faculty members can be shy, or also they're engaged or involved in other activities. But if you take the initiative to get close to your teachers, you're really gaining an experience that you cannot gain otherwise. So I'm recommending administrators to think about the cost that you pay by actually having faculty focusing a lot of administrative tasks and not giving enough importance to the spending time with the students and engaging together in something. The good thing of Weimar, and this is what I find it fascinating, is that we should not take lightly the Wednesday afternoon time on TCI, because this is what TCI is all about. And we as a faculty and students, we need to realize we want to reach out, and that is very important. But we're not only helping the people out there, the students are gaining an experience and a commitment into serving others, but also the faculty. Because many of us, honestly, we go to TCI, but we never experienced that before. This is new also for us. So your engagement together as teachers and students together, it makes a big difference, not only for the student, but also for the faculty. So I think those are the major recommendations. Any question?
So based on your research, what do you think we can improve at Weimar based on your research?
I think that Weimar already we're taking the steps that it's really aligned with the research, the fact of the TCI making it that mandatory and part of the program. We're already doing that, but I think it goes beyond that because the students see that as mandatory. This is like a check mark. I think that outside TCI, we as a faculty need to take the initiative to engage students personally to also do that type of work beyond TCI.
So your recommendation is to go beyond TCI into student-faculty interaction.
Yes. I think that is very important. If you look at Jesus and his method with 12 disciples, basically that was his method. He walked with them. He spent time with them. That's really the foundation of this model. Any other question? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Maria, for giving us the data that helps us understand the why behind our Wednesday afternoon program. So really appreciate that. Up next, we have a collaborative student presentation by our soon-to-be natural science graduates. Yes, actually, yes. Robin Choi, Ian Rodriguez, and Tegan Smith titled The 3 and the MD. So we're looking forward to your findings as well.
Thank you. Well, I'll just start talking. Hopefully it'll show up eventually. But our project, our capstone project, we decided to group up and start a podcast that we titled The 3 and the MD. So our podcast talks about the scientific principles of today and the relevance of Ellen White's health counsel from over 100 years ago. We show how modern science is just now coming to show that what she wrote over 100 years ago is really true. So why did we decide to do a podcast? I think I need the slides. Here, well, anyways, how many of you have heard of the 3 and the MD podcast? Yep. So we tried posting it around so people could see it. It's been a lot of fun. We have 6 episodes up right now, with a 7th one on the way. But it's been a blessing to get to talk to so many doctors and just learn about how really what Ellen White says has been shown to be true. Okay, so that's us. We actually tried to match, like we're kind of wearing the same thing almost. Well, so why did we choose to do a podcast? Why not anything else? Like we could have written a book like Lillian, we could have made a website, we could have done anything else. But why a podcast? So I have a little illustration. When you see this man, what do you think? So some people might think tariffs, other people might think MAGA. If you ask my team, they think stress because they're like, Ian, why are you talking about Donald Trump? But when you see him, I want you to think podcast. So this past election has been nicknamed the podcast election, and for a good reason. Actually, we see that both candidates decided to go on podcast to talk to the public. Donald Trump had over 124 million views on YouTube alone, not counting other platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcast. And although we can't quantify the effects of podcasts directly, we can't correlate the two candidates and their methods. So we see that Trump appeared in more than 15 podcasts, some notable ones being the Joe Rogan Show this past weekend with Theo Vaughn, and all of this combined, all of the ones he appeared, there's over 1,000 minutes of content where you can listen to Trump speak. Well, as Kamala Harris only appeared in 3 podcasts, and cumulatively only about 3 hours. So we see that one candidate chose to completely embrace this new media style, and the other one was hesitant to do so. And this quote kind of sums it up. Every presidential election is a snapshot in time of the media landscape, meaning that media is shifting. People are listening to podcasts for their information. This is where people are getting their news nowadays. So who is listening and why are they listening? So as research suggests that about half of Americans listen to at least one podcast monthly. We see that political candidates are leveraging this and they're reaching young voters through this. Most of podcast listeners are young people because it's accessible everywhere. Everyone has a phone, everyone has a smartphone. They can listen to podcasts wherever they go. And they also offer in-depth discussion. As when you have like a regular news show, it's more like scripted, they have their questions, they ask their questions, the person answers the questions. And oftentimes it's more confrontational. The political candidate is trying to share what they know, and then the other person is trying to kind of catch them almost. But in a podcast, it offers more of a chill, relaxed, you're talking to them, you're getting to know them as a person, which people appreciate because at the end of the day, we're all people and we long for conversation. So the global podcasting industry at this point is valued over $4 billion, which means that there's plenty of people that are listening and investing their time into this. So it works for politics, but does it work for medicine and science? So there's this podcast called the Huberman Lab podcast, which right now has over 6 million subscribers on YouTube. And again, Spotify and Apple Music don't really tell you the statistics like YouTube does, so it's hard to know, but over hundreds of thousands of listeners on all these platforms. So people are tuning in each month to listen to these things. Another one, which is actually the inspiration behind this, is a podcast called The Checkup with Dr. Mike. I don't know if some of you have heard of it. But as I was listening to this podcast, I was hearing a lot of randomized control trials, this and this and that. We need to have this hard science. And I realized, hard science is good, but there is also an element that we know that is important. And we know that Ellen White has talked about in her writings. So why not combine both? Why not have the hard science with the spirit of prophecy so we can see what the true heavenly science is like?
So for our scientific research portion of this podcast, what we did is we basically looked through scientific articles through the Weimar library, which is an awesome resource, and we found sources and compiled them for each topic and just made a little reference sheet for each episode. For example, this is for our first episode talking about media, sports, and addiction with Dr. Arvisu. And we basically just did some background research so we can ask the right questions at the right time during the podcast. And we also had an episode with Dr. Kuninobu about food, fasting, and feasting. We talked about intermittent fasting and what Ellen White said about that. Our episode 3 was about meat, myths, muscles, and maladies with Dr. Nedley. And we talked about charcoal with naturopathic Dr. Kinjo. And that was really fun. Our 5th episode is about family, friends, and fiancés with Chad and Fadia Cruiser, who are not medical doctors, but they are a married couple, so they qualify. And our most recent episode was with Dr. Schwelt about sunlight, sleep, and circadian rhythm. And he actually appeared on a podcast, the Huberman Lab, right before he came on ours. So he saved the better one for last. Sorry, just kidding. Sorry. Anyways, so we have each of the reference sheets available on our link tree, so people can access our resources that we reference for every episode. So why do we want to do this just on a regular basis when it comes to science? Well, it's actually the secret to how Dr. Kellogg always stayed ahead of the game. So here's a little conversation that David Paulson had with Dr. Kellogg. And he says, Dr. Kellogg asked me in New York City 22 years ago if I knew how it was that the Battle Creek Sanitarium was able to keep 5 years ahead of the medical profession. I did not know. Oops. Okay. Then he told me. He said when a new thing is brought out in the medical literature or in the world, he knew from his knowledge of the spirit of prophecy whether it belonged in our system or not. If it did, he instantly adopted it and advertised it, while the rest of the doctors were slowly feeling their way. Slowly feeling their way. I'm slowly feeling my way through this. Okay. And where was I? Okay, and when they finally adopted it, he had 5 years head start on them. So on the other hand, when the medical profession were swept off their feet by some new fad, if it did not fit the light we had received, he simply did not touch it. When the doctors finally discovered their mistake, they wondered how it was that Dr. Kellogg did not get caught off guard. And so this was so inspiring to us because Dr. Kellogg was able to, basically when a new study came out, he was able to say, oh, that's not true, that's true. Why? Because he knew that Ellen White had received a vision regarding that topic. And I believe we can do the same thing today, right? So, for example, in our episode with Dr. Kuninobu, we talked about the standard American diet versus, some other diets. Actually, this was in Dr. Neddy's episode, sorry, about meat and plant-based diet. And, there's so much research coming about the keto diet and all these carnivorous diets. And it's like, well, we should eat meat, right? But actually, we know from Spirit of Prophecy that that's really not a good idea, especially in the long term. And so we're able to quickly filter through the research more efficiently than the rest of the scientific world who are slowly feeling their way through the research. So why did we have a doctor on our podcast? Why can't just three of us talk about it, right? And of course, that would be fun if it was just us three, but the reason we had a doctor on board also was because they can share a kind of a more professional perspective on the topic. But also, interestingly, did you guys know that Jesus had a podcast? It was called Jesus and the Doctors. Luke chapter 2, verse 46. And it came to pass that after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. That's exactly what we're doing. So basically, we're trying to follow the example of Jesus, ask the doctor some questions, listen what they have, and I believe that's a very effective way to discover truth and to share it with the world. So that was our inspiration. So now Tegan will share about the spirit of prophecy.
So you guys heard the why a podcast, and you heard why science, but why Ellen White? To illustrate this, I actually want to tell you all a little bit about her later life. So in her later life, she was doing a lot of writing, and she would typically do this up in her little writing room. And downstairs, she would have a secretary working at letting people in to see her for appointments or whatever it may be. And people would come by just to visit with Ellen White. And commonly, they would be turned away by what they called the stern secretary. Now, this probably happened for a little bit, and soon some of these people discovered that there was a little stairway that made it directly to Ellen White's room. And they soon started sneaking up the stairway and going to see her directly. And they would always be welcomed, and Ellen White would put aside what she was doing and talk with them and share with them. And that's really what we're trying to do with our podcast. We don't want people to see the stern secretary at the front door saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you didn't make an appointment. We want people to find a way to see Ellen White as she is, the happy, inviting person that she is. So some of the main things that we went over in our podcast are from the 4 main visions that Ellen White had about health. And these things are meant to help us to improve our lives now, especially as time is coming to a close. When I think about prophets, I think about all the biblical prophets who had very rough time. And I think, wow, if I were a person during that time, I would sure want to listen to what these people were saying, because if they did, they would be much more prepared for what is coming. And many times when I think those thoughts, I stop and say, oh, that is us today. We have someone who is telling us, who has words to tell us that can help us for today and can move us from our spiritual lukewarmness to on fire for the Lord. So something that we're trying to do is help people really understand and dive deep into what Ellen White said. And this is a little poem that I heard from, I'm probably going to slaughter this name, Joachim Hortland from AFCO Europe. This is something he shares when he talks about Ellen White, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, "Make sure she said it. Well, I never really read it, but someone said she said it. So of course it must be so. To prove my point, I'll quote it, though I can't show where she wrote it. But someone said she said it, and that's all I need to know. It saves a lot of time for me if I just listen carefully when others speak of Sister White and what they say she said. Though I can't repeat it word for word, I'll tell you what I think I heard and quote you things from Sister White that no one's ever read." So this is a little comical, but the point is, I want you all to read and understand and see the value of the spirit of prophecy that we have today. And through our podcast, I want you guys to see the value of this gift. And most of all, we want to point people to Jesus. So you all can get out your phones, and we have a QR code here, and you can find our podcast on this QR code. Thank you all very much.
Right, thank you all for the excellent collaboration, not just with the doctors, but mostly with each other. I'm sure that was quite an adventure. And I'm looking forward to tuning in myself, and we hope that you continue producing more content too. To conclude our list of presenters, we'll be having a very familiar face, our very own Pastor Don McIntosh, who will be sharing with us.
Okay. I will be very brief because I have a class that starts at 10 with guests coming from the community. So let me just tell you that my work of research is always ongoing. You are part of my subjects, but and I try and include you in my research projects. But basically, my research is the science of salvation. And we're told that the highest of all sciences is the science of soul winning. And the greatest work which human beings can aspire in is the work of winning men from sin to holiness. And to do that, you have to have a knowledge of human nature and a study of the human mind. So the way I've been doing that is largely with the Depression Anxiety Recovery Program, but also in the community on TCI with Bible studies ongoing. And I really believe these quotes are true. The last one I'll just focus on. Strength to resist evil is best gained by aggressive service. And the reason that's true is if you are focusing on someone other than yourself to win a soul, you will not have the same mental health problems. You will not have an internal, you'll have an internal focus of control, not an external focus of control. And I've just seen that anecdotally, but among faculty and students at Weimar, and even myself, if I'm not involved actually in winning a soul, I'm going to be doing something that's harmful to myself or my family. And I think that's the special sauce of Weimar. When I listen to Tyndall, I think Weimar is a Tyndall experiment. Certainly, I've worked here since 2008, and we definitely have had as many souls as Tyndall did in the same amount of time. And we're doing that all in little rings that I think are becoming more and more sophisticated, hopefully, as we stumble along. My research is usually related to individuals. This lady came, she just was not interested in church. She was turned off to church. But she found, just like others have found, that people have a hard time finding a satisfying alternative to religion. And these are just articles from yesterday. Church attendance among Gen Z has quadrupled in the last several months in the United Kingdom. And that's because people are again looking after COVID-19. So what I've been doing is, you know what I've been doing. I've been studying these people and learning. God actually teaches me. He's done the research. But if I make myself available, he reveals things to me that win souls. And I see him doing that. Then I turn it into T-shirts. And other people read the T-shirts. And then I turn it into a book about them. And these people got baptized this last Sabbath. And our counsel is given, let the worker grasp the promises of God. I must have this soul converted to God. And when that happens, you start to pray for these people. And as you do this, underlines the section, God will give the Holy Spirit to convict, and the power of the truth will convert the soul. And when you see that, that's the research. You actually see what the Holy Spirit did to win that soul. You write it down, and you do it again. And it's not your research, it's what God did, and he knows what to do. And this is the most exciting kind of research. Now, this is kind of interesting. So I've written 2 books now based on soul winning in the last 2 years. Yesterday, as I was talking to Sydney, who was baptized on Sabbath, she said to me, we need to write a book together. And I said, what? And she said, and I thought she was joking. And then she requested that she counsel with me every week for the next 10 weeks. And I thought to myself, I have so much other things to do. I don't know if I want to do that. But then I realized that the exchange with her is something that not only is going to be good for her, but many, many other people, because it's studying suicidality within that demographic as it relates to theological error. And she already began writing the first chapter. And so this is my next research project. And I want to just leave this with you. Take heed to yourselves and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. Many times people that are struggling, in fact, in my own life, when I became suicidal and depressed during college, was because I was not doing this. When I started doing this, my mental health problems evaporated. And strength to resist evil is best gained by aggressive service. So I want to encourage faculty and students to just keep that. You have a place here where you actually can do that. And revival and reformation has to be linked with soul winning. If it's not, it becomes a problem. It has to be linked with that. And then life becomes very, very, very fun. You find your partners in ministry, get into the swing of things, and God blesses you with joy and happiness. Amen?
Hello. Thank you, Pastor Don, for wrapping things up. And as we wrap today's symposium, I want to thank all of our presenters for having a lifelong pursuit of knowledge, and our audience for your thoughtful attention and questions as well. Dr. Musozi has a few words to say.
I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you, members of the faculty who presented today. Thank you very, very much for stimulating our minds. Dr. Harris, thank you for speaking part of your presentation in English. Thank you very much. We appreciate that very much. I want to appreciate especially the student presentations. I appreciate your youthfulness, your young ideas that stimulate us, the energy that you put into whatever you do. It comes across very clearly, and I appreciate it very much. I'd like to invite more of you to think of participating, using your active, youthful energies in research so that we all can become a better place as we help one another upward. Let us pray. Father, thank you so much. Thank you for this beautiful day that you have given us, a bright, beautiful day. We are reminded of you as the Son of Righteousness, who arises with healing in your wings as we see the sun outside. We pray that you may help us to enjoy this day, enjoy your presence, enjoy one another. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed. There is no assembly this afternoon. You are dismissed.